The wind cut like knives through the narrow streets, rattling loose shutters and whizzing through the gaps of boarded windows. Snow fell in restless flurries, carried sideways across the road by unseen hands. This was the kind of morning that tested even the hardiest souls of the northern town one of those days, where the cold seemed to seep into bone and linger. Few dared step outside unless they had no choice. Emily Parker tightened her scarf against the bite of the air, her gloved fingers trembling as she adjusted it around her throat. Her other hand clung to the small, mittened one of her son, Liam, the boy's boots. Second hand, and nearly as size to big, squeaked with every crunch of ice beneath them. Emily could feel the tiny tremor of his body even through their joined hands. "I'm cold, Mommy," Liam whispered, his breath a puff of white in the bitter air. "I know, sweetheart," Emily said softly, giving his hand a squeeze. "We're almost there," she smiled, though her lips were cracked from the weather and her cheeks burned red with cold. The preschool was just 4 blocks from the duplex they called home, but the walk always felt longer on mornings like this. The building they lived in creaked and groaned like an old man in pain. The windows leaked, the plumbing shrieked, and the furnace coughed more often than it breathed. Yet it was what she could afford on to jobs mornings at the diner, afternoons cleaning houses, evenings falling asleep next to a stack of unpaid bills. None of that mattered when Liam looked up at her with those wide, trusting eyes. She would carry him across the snow if she had to. The faint rumble of the town bus drifted over the wind. A rectangle of yellow light cut through the swirling snow as it pulled up to the stop. Near the preschool, the doors groaned open and Frank Doyle leaned forward from his seat. His cap was pulled low, his jaw rough with stubble. Frank had driven this route for decades, the bus seat molding to the shape of his weary frame. He'd seen the town change, grow colder not just in winters, but in spirit. "Mornin', Emily," Frank said, his gravelly voice carrying warmth beneath the gruffness. "Morning, Frank," she replied, offering a tired smile as Liam pressed closer to her side. Frank's eyes flicked to the boy, then back to her. He didn't ask how she was managing. He never did. Instead, he gave a small nod, the kind that said he saw her struggle and respected her quiet strength. It was enough. The bus doors hissed shut, and with a lurch, the vehicle pulled back onto the snowy road. Frank's gaze swept across the streets as he maneuvered the heavy machine through the storm. That was when he saw as something hunched at the far end of the next block, near the bus shelter. For a fleeting moment, he thought it was a heap of discarded snow gear, maybe a broken sled abandoned in the storm. But as the headlights cut sharper through the snow, he caught the faint outline of shoulders, a bent head, a figure slumped and motionless. His hands tightened on the wheel. A man, a drunk, a shadow. The bus rattled on, the passengers behind him shifting in their seats. Frank glanced in the rearview mirror, then back to the street ahead. He didn't stop. Not this time. Not in this cold. Not with a schedule to keep. But something gnawed at him as the bus carried him away from that silent shape in the snow. On the sidewalk, Emily hadn't noticed. She tugged Liam closer, her eyes fixed on the diner's distant glow, unaware that the path she trudged was about to cross with the figure Frank had left behind. The storm deepened, the streets groaned under its weight, and the town itself seemed to hold its breath. Waiting, the diner's neon sign flickered against the falling snow, casting a pale red glow across the frosted windows. Emily quickened her steps, her boots crunching heavily, eager for warmth and the comfort of routine. She had walked this path so many times she could trace it with her eyes closed. Yet that morning felt different. The silence pressed heavier, as if the world itself had curled inward against the storm. That was when she saw him at first glance. He looked like nothing more than a bundle of rags left at the bus shelter. The snow clung to him in patches, disguising his form, the shape barely distinguishable from the drifts piled along the street. But as she drew closer, she realized it was an old man hunched forward, his shoulders shaking violently with the cold. His coat hung from his frame like a curtain disguised as large, its buttons missing, the fabric stained. His feet were bare except for thin socks, already soaked and clinging to bluish skin. Emily slowed, her instincts pulling her into directions. She was late for her shift. She was always late, and the manager had already warned her once more tardiness would cost her the job. But she couldn't move past him, not with Liam's mitten still in her hand, not with her heart hammering at the sight of him trembling there like a forgotten soul. "Sir," she called softly. The old man stirred, lifting his head an inch. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, and his lips moved with words too soft to catch. Emily stepped closer, tugging Liam gently behind her. "Are you all right?" she asked, This time, his voice was audible, though thin as paper. Today's his birthday. 6 years old. I promised him cake. His gaze darted beyond her shoulder, toward nothing, as if chasing something in the snow. I said no. I told him no. Emily's breath caught. The words seemed torn from another time. His voice not anchored in the present, but drifting somewhere between memory and regret. She crouched down carefully, ignoring the icy sting seeping through her thin jeans. Sir, she said softly, you're freezing. Let me help you. His eyes finally landed on her, startling in their sudden clarity. He begged me. She begged me. White frosting. I said no. Always busy, too busy. His shoulders quaked, not entirely from the cold, and his hands clawed weakly at his coat as though trying to bury himself in its folds. Emily reached out and touched his arm. His skin was shockingly cold, colder than the wind. The tremor beneath her fingers was not just shivering, it was fragility. The thin wire of life stretched too tight. Come with me, she urged gently. There's warmth ahead. Food, you can't stay here. For a moment, she thought he might resist, thought he might sink further into the snow and vanish like a shadow swallowed by the storm. Then his body leaned toward hers, not a choice but a surrender, and she slipped her arm around him. Liam pressed close on her other side, wide-eyed, clutching her coat. Together, they moved toward the diner, step by step, Emily bearing more of the old man's weight with each dragging footfall. When she pushed open the door, the bell above it jingled, and every head turned. He rushed to meet them, thick with the smell of frying bacon and coffee. But so did the weight of curious eyes. Conversations faltered. A couple of truckers at the counter frowned. The cook raised an eyebrow, spatula frozen midair. Emily guided the old man to the booth nearest the heater and coaxed him into the seat. His head lolled back for a moment, lips still moving with words no one could understand. She straightened, brushing snow from her shoulders, and approached the counter. Tracy, she said, her voice steady but low, can I get some oatmeal, toast, and hot coffee? I'll pay. The waitress, a woman with sharp eyeliner and a sharper tongue, pursed her lips. Emily, honey, you don't have to. I want to. Emily cut in, more firmly this time. Please. Tracy hesitated, then nodded when Emily returned to the booth. The old man was whispering again, his words fractured, desperate. She begged me. Just a cake. White frosting. I said no. Her chest tightened. She slid into the seat across from him, her hand resting near his on the table, steady but patient. What's your name? He blinked at her slowly, as if the question had pulled him through layers of fog. Walter, he murmured. Walter Blake. She smiled softly. Hi, Walter. I'm Emily. For just a second, his gaze steadied, and she thought she saw gratitude flicker across his face. He lifted the steaming coffee to his lips when it arrived, hands trembling, and took a slow sip. His breath hitched, and something loosened in him. Like the warmth of the liquid reminded him he was still alive. But even as the color crept faintly back into his cheeks, his eyes returned to the window. Snowflakes gathered there in silent clusters, and he whispered to no one in particular. I killed her. Because I said no. I killed her. Emily sat frozen, the air heavy with his confession. She didn't understand the story, didn't know the details, but she felt the weight of it, the raw grief in every syllable. She didn't move, didn't flinch, just reached across the table and set a napkin gently in his hand. You're safe now, Walter, she whispered. I'm here. And for a flickering moment, his eyes met hers, clear and human. Before drifting again into the storm, the bell above the diner door jingled sharply, and a gust of winter air swept through the narrow room, scattering napkins across the floor. Emily looked up instinctively, her breath catching in her throat. A tall figure filled the doorway, snow still clinging to the broad shoulders of his dark wool coat. His hair dusted white at the edges. He was not like the others who came into this roadside diner, no trucker in heavy boots, no weary farmer thawing his hands. This man carried himself with an authority that didn't belong to this town. His eyes gray and restless, scanned the diner with precision. When they landed on the booth nearest the heater, his whole body went taut, like a bowstring drawn to breaking. Emily felt the shift before she understood it, a weight in the air pressing down. Walter stirred at the same moment, sensing something, and his cracked lips pulled into a trembling smile. There he is, Walter whispered hoarsely, reaching for the air as though he could pluck the figure from across the room. My son, it's his birthday today. 6 years old. You want cake, don't you? I'll go get it. The stranger froze. His expression fractured relief, grief, suspicion all colliding in the same breath. His jaw clenched, his hands fisted at his sides. For a terrifying moment, Emily thought he might storm forward and drag the old man away, accuse her of something she hadn't done. She rose slightly from her seat, protective, shielding Walter with her presence though she had no plan for what would come next. Their eyes met. The man's gaze pierced into her, sharp and assessing, as if he were used to reading faces in boardrooms. Weighing truth against deceit, Emily expected anger, expected him to see her as some stranger taking advantage of his father's fragility. And she saw that suspicion flicker there, hot and ready. But then his eyes shifted, softened almost imperceptibly. He saw her hand on Walter's, steady and patient. He saw the untouched oatmeal she had bought, the coffee cooling between them. The way she leaned toward Walter, not with pity, but with care. And for the briefest second, he hesitated. Walter's trembling hand reached again, not for Emily this time, but for him. The man strode forward at last, the weight of his steps commanding, each stride carrying the kind of presence that silenced a room. He reached the booth and stopped, towering over them. Emily could feel the intensity rolling off him like a storm about to break. "You're his son," Emily said softly, the realization falling from her lips before she could stop it. The man's throat worked, his voice low, roughened by exhaustion and something deeper. "Yes, I'm Nathaniel. Nathaniel Blake." Walter beamed like a child, clapping his hands weakly, delighted. "I told you I'd find him," he whispered to Emily, pride glowing in his broken eyes. "Didn't I say?" "My boy." Emily stepped aside, letting Nathaniel slide into her place. He knelt beside his father, his hand closing carefully over Walter's frail one, his strong fingers trembling against paper-thin skin. "Hi, Dad," he whispered, his voice raw. Walter's face lit up with joy, but it was a fractured joy, full of cracks and shadows. "We need cake," he mumbled urgently. "For your birthday? White frosting. I'll go get it." Nathaniel's eyes shut tight, pain carving lines into his face. His breath hitched audibly, but when he opened his eyes again, they were bright with tears. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. Emily, standing a step away now, felt her own chest tighten at the sight. She had seen men cry before customers, drunk and sloppy, men who broke under debts, but not like this. Not a man who looked like steel on the outside, suddenly shattered from the inside. Nathaniel pressed his forehead gently to his father's hand, holding it as though afraid it would vanish. Walter's murmurs continued, fragments of memory and guilt weaving through the warmth of the booth. And Emily realized she was standing in the middle of something much larger that she could yet see. Tracy at the counter, normally quick with a joke or a bite of gossip, had gone silent. Even the truckers shifted uneasily, their eyes down, as if they all knew they were intruding on something sacred. Emily, trying to give them space, moved back to the counter. She busied her hands by straightening a stack of menus, but her ears stayed tuned to the broken, fragile exchanges at the booth. When she finally returned with fresh coffee, Nathaniel looked up at her. His eyes, rimmed with red, carried both gratitude and disbelief. His voice was quieter now, stripped of its commanding edge. "You helped him when no one else would. That means more than I can say." Emily shook her head, brushing off the thanks. "I couldn't just leave him out there. Not in this cold." But she felt something else beneath his words, something unspoken. The way he looked at her wasn't just gratitude, it was recognition. As if her simple kindness had touched a part of him he thought long dead. And though she didn't want to admit it, the intensity of that gaze made her pulse quicken, even as the storm outside howled harder against the diner windows. It was not just Walter's birthday that was being remembered in that booth. Something else was being born in the space between grief and kindness. In the flicker of warmth in the dead of winter. The snow outside battered the diner windows like impatient fists, and inside the air felt thick with silence. Walter had slumped against the window, his head bobbing lightly, lips still moving with half-formed words. Nathaniel remained close, his hand on his father's, while Emily lingered nearby, watching both men as though they were fragile glass that might shatter at any moment. It should have ended there. Walter rescued, father and son reunited, the scene resolved. But something in Nathaniel's eyes told Emily this was only the beginning. His sharp, commanding presence was still there, but it was being gnawed by grief, guilt, and exhaustion. He looked like a man who had carried too much for too long, his armor cracking in places he hadn't expected. Emily excused herself quietly and slipped into the kitchen. The cook raised an eyebrow as she opened the cooler. She ignored him and dug past trays of leftover pie until her fingers found what she needed. A half slice of chocolate cake, forgotten, its frosting slightly cracked from the chill. It wasn't much, but in that moment, she knew it mattered. When she returned, Nathaniel's eyes followed her carefully, guarded at first, until she placed the small plate on the table. A single candle, salvaged from a drawer by Tracy, flickered atop it. Emily lit it with a match, the tiny flame casting a warm, wavering glow between them. "Happy birthday," she said softly. Walter stirred at once. His eyes lit up, suddenly lucid, his body jerking upright with surprising energy. "Cake," he shouted, clapping off for them, out of time, but full of childlike joy. "Sing the song, sing it." The absurdity of it startled a laugh from Emily's lips, and to her surprise, a few of the truckers chuckled too. Even Tracy hummed a note or two. The cook leaned out of the kitchen, shaking his head, but smiling faintly as the ragtag choir began their fractured rendition of Happy Birthday. Walter beamed, clapping along, tears streaking his weathered cheeks. Emily's laughter softened, her heart aching at the sight of a man broken by time and regret finding the sliver of happiness in such a simple gesture. But Nathaniel didn't laugh. He sat frozen, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on the tiny candle flame. Then, suddenly, he stood and turned sharply, striding toward the bathroom at the back of the diner. Emily's smile faltered. Had she done something wrong? Had she embarrassed him, humiliated his father? Doubt pricked at her, sharp as the cold wind still pressing at the diner door. She wanted to go after him, but something stopped her, something about the way his shoulders had hunched, the way his hand had brushed against his face as he left. When he returned minutes later, his eyes were red, his composure cracked. Emily opened her mouth to apologize, but he raised a hand quickly. His voice was rough, broken at the edges. "No, don't." He swallowed hard, glancing at the candle still flickering between them. "You didn't do anything wrong. You gave me something I didn't know I needed, a moment I never had." His voice wavered, and for a heartbeat, the CEO's armor slipped entirely. "Thank you for that." The words lodged deep in Emily's chest, warmer than the coffee, heavier than the storm outside. She nodded, unable to answer, and busied herself with refilling his cup for the next hour. The diner fell into an uneasy stillness. Walter ate slowly, sometimes speaking to the cake as if it were alive, sometimes gazing at Nathaniel with pride that seemed decades overdue. Nathaniel said little, his gaze wandering from his father to Emily, as though unsure what to do with the storm inside him. At last, Walter's eyes fluttered shut, his head drooping against the frosted glass. His breathing steadied, though uneven, like a man finally surrendering to sleep. Emily pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, uncertain what would come next. Nathaniel broke the silence. "Thank you again," he said, his voice low, as though afraid to wake his father. Emily nodded. He shouldn't be outside alone in this weather. "Do you live nearby?" Nathaniel hesitated. His eyes darted to the window, where the snow still fell thick and endless. "I don't." He's supposed to be in a care home, and I'm from here. They called this morning when they found his bed empty, in this cold. Emily asked, her voice edged with disbelief. Nathaniel gave a grim nod. He must have wandered off during the night. I was tracking him ever since. He shouldn't have been able to get out at all. His jaw clenched, anger flickering in his expression, not at his father, but at himself. Or maybe at the faceless people meant to be watching him, as if sensing their conversation. Walter stirred, his frail hand fumbling blindly across the table until it caught Emily's wrist. His grip, surprisingly strong, made her still. His eyes opened, hazy but filled with desperation. "Don't take me back," he murmured. His voice cracked, each word pulled from somewhere deep in his chest. "Please, I want to stay with her. She's kind." Emily's breath hitched. She looked down at his hand clutching hers, at the trust and fear mingled in his expression. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. Nathaniel stood motionless, watching. For once, he didn't look like a man used to power or wealth. He looked torn, his father's plea unraveling him thread by thread. "I'm not taking him far," Nathaniel said gently, kneeling beside Walter again. "Just back to the facility for a few days. Then I'll move him somewhere better." But Walter wouldn't let go of Emily. His fingers dug into her skin, his cloudy eyes locked on hers as if she were the only anchor, keeping him from drifting into the storm forever. Emily's throat tightened. She glanced at Nathaniel, then back at Walter. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "He can stay with me tonight." My place isn't much, but it's warm. I'll make sure he eats. You can check on him whenever you want." The storm howled outside the diner walls, as if echoing the weight of the choice Nathaniel now had to make. For the first time in years, he hesitated not as a CEO, not as a man of power, but simply as a son caught between fear and hope. As the night pressed hard against Emily's duplex, the wind rattling the old windows like a ghost trying to claw its way inside. The heater groaned as if offended by the effort of staying alive, puffing out thin streams of warmth that barely reached the edges of the small living room. The place was cramped, paint peeling from the trim, linoleum curling in the kitchen corner, but it was home. And tonight it carried 3 lives inside it, each trembling for different reasons. Walter sat hunched on a threadbare sofa, a wool blanket wrapped around his shoulders. His eyelids fluttered, half awake, half somewhere else. Every so often his lips moved, whispers escaping fragments of sentences about cake, a child's laughter, a snow-covered road. Emily moved quietly around the room, ladling soup into bowls, her hands steady though her heart still carried the weight of what she had agreed to. Nathaniel stood awkwardly near the doorway, his tall frame out of place in the tiny space. He had shed his heavy coat, revealing a crisp charcoal soup beneath, the kind of attire that didn't belong anywhere near her leaky duplex. He looked like he had stepped out of another world entirely, a world of glass towers and endless money, and yet here he was, his eyes following every motion Emily made. Liam darted between them, his 4-year-old energy untamed even by the long day. He climbed onto the arm of the sofa beside Walter, peering curiously at the old man. "Are you my grandpa?" he asked with innocent bluntness. Emily froze, her ladle hovering above the pot. Nathaniel stiffened, his eyes snapping to Walter, waiting for the answer. Walter blinked at the boy, confusion swirling. Then his face softened into a smile so frail it almost broke Emily's heart. "Maybe I am," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "I'd like to be." Liam grinned, satisfied, and tucked himself under Walter's arm as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Emily exhaled slowly, setting the ladle down. Nathaniel turned his gaze away, his jaw tightening, but she caught the shimmer of moisture in his eyes. Before he did, they ate together in uneasy silence. The soup was thin broth and potatoes stretched as far as she could manage, but Walter savored each spoonful as though it were a banquet. Liam chattered about preschool, about the toy truck he wanted, about the snowman he hoped to build. His voice filled the room, a buffer against the storm outside and the heavier storm brewing inside Nathaniel. Finally, when Liam had been tucked into bed with an extra blanket and Walter was dozing again on the sofa, Emily found herself alone with Nathaniel in the dim kitchen. The single light bulb buzzed overhead, casting tired shadows across the peeling linoleum. She poured him coffee without asking, sliding the chipped mug across the table. "You don't have to stay," she said quietly. "He's safe here tonight. I'll watch him." Nathaniel stared at the cup, then at her. "I don't doubt that." His voice was low, steady, but there was something unspoken beneath it. He sat, his large frame making the chair creak. "You don't understand. He wasn't supposed to get out. The home. They promised me he'd be secure, that this couldn't happen again." Emily leaned against the counter, arms folded, studying him. Again, his eyes flickered, the faintest crack in the armor. "This isn't the first time. Last year, in another city, they found him half a mile away, barefoot in the rain. I thought I fixed it this time. Paid more, demanded better care. But money doesn't build walls high enough to keep the past out of his mind." Emily's heart squeezed. She had expected coldness from him, a hard-edged businessman who might take Walter back to some sterile room without a thought. But here he was, stripped of certainty, his guilt laid bare. He didn't want her here for nothing. Emily said softly, "He was looking for someone. For you, for forgiveness. Maybe both." Nathaniel's hands curled into fists around the mug. "Forgiveness?" His laugh was bitter. "I was 6 when it happened. 6. My mother was gone in an instant because he said no to a birthday cake. I've carried that silence every year since. He never said sorry. Never once." The words cracked in the air between them, sharp and raw. Emily's breath caught, but she didn't look away. She saw him not as the CEO, not as the commanding figure who had stormed into the diner, but as a boy who had lost his mother in the snow and had been left to raise himself on bitterness. Outside, the storm howled louder, shaking the window panes. Inside, silence pressed down again. Then, faintly, Walter stirred on the sofa. His voice drifted into the kitchen, fragile but clear. I should have gone. Should have gotten the cake. Nathaniel froze. His face turned toward the living room, his body trembling as though the words had struck a blow. Emily placed a gentle hand on his arm, grounding him. Her touch quiet, but unyielding in that moment. Nathaniel realized something. This woman with nothing, no money, no comfort, no safety net had given his father more dignity in a single night than all his wealth ever had. And worse, she had given him something he hadn't expected at all, the terrifying hope that maybe the wounds of the past weren't unhealable. The heater groaned again. Walter's breathing steadied. Liam stirred in the next room, and Nathaniel sat in a crumbling duplex kitchen, staring at Emily Parker, knowing that something irreversible had begun in the middle of a storm. The storm had deepened by midnight, a relentless howl battering against the walls of Emily's duplex. Snowflakes slapped the windows with icy fingers, and the old heater sputtered like it was on its last breath. Emily sat on the edge of the worn armchair, listening. Liam was tucked safely in his bed, his soft snores drifting down the hall. Walter dozed fitfully on the couch, his face twisting with dreams, his lips mumbling pieces of the past. Nathaniel stood near the window, tall and still, his silhouette cast in the dim glow of a streetlight outside. He hadn't taken off his suit jacket. He hadn't sat down. He stood as though he couldn't, as though the weight of the room, the peeling walls, the smell of soup still lingering in the air. The quiet creaks of the old duplex pressed on him more heavily than any skyscraper boardroom ever had. His father's frail breaths behind him seemed to haunt every second. Emily broke the silence. You don't have to stay all night. I meant what I said. He'll be safe here. Nathaniel's voice was low, almost bitter. Safe is a word I've bought 100 times. Never delivered. Emily studied him. His jaw was tight, his hand pressed to the window frame as though he needed to brace himself against something. She wanted to reach for him, to say something that might cut through the armor. But before she could, a noise split the night. The front door rattled. Emily shot to her feet. Walter stirred. Nathaniel's eyes sharpened as he turned from the window. Then came a heavy pounding, 3 hard knocks against the wood, echoing like thunder in the storm. Emily's heart leapt. At this hour? In this weather? She moved slowly toward the door, but Nathaniel caught her wrist, pulling her back. His grip was firm, protective. Don't, he whispered. His gaze flicked to the door, sharp and wary, like a man who had learned long ago that danger always came unannounced. The knocking came again. Emily, you in there? Her chest loosened, though not entirely. She knew that voice. Frank Doyle, the bus driver. Gruff, weathered, always watching from the edges of her life. He must have doubled back after his shift. The worry that had clouded his face earlier now dragging him through the storm to her door. Emily opened the door a crack, cold air rushing in like a blade. Frank stood there, snow-caked on his shoulders, his cheeks raw from the wind. His eyes darted past her immediately, landing on the tall figure of Nathaniel, then on Walter slumped on the couch. So it's true, Frank muttered. You brought him here. Emily's voice was cautious. He needed somewhere warm. I couldn't just leave him. Frank's jaw worked, his eyes narrowing on Nathaniel. And who's this? Nathaniel stepped forward before Emily could answer. His presence filled the doorway, his tone calm but edged. His son. Frank's gaze hardened, flicking between them. His son shows up in a snowstorm, wearing a suit, and now he's here in her house? Emily, do you know what you've dragged into your life? The words stung. Emily flushed, her instinct to defend flaring, but Nathaniel spoke first. She didn't drag me here. I came because my father needed me. His voice dropped lower, laced with steel. And she saved his life when no one else would. The storm shrieked outside, snow sweeping into the entryway as the 2 men squared off. Emily stood between them, her pulse racing, feeling as though the fragile warmth of her home could be split in 2. Frank's face softened slightly, though his voice remained gruff. Emily, you've got Liam to think about. You don't know him. Men like that. He jerked his head toward Nathaniel. They don't belong in this world of ours. They break things without meaning to. And you can't afford more broken pieces. Emily's throat tightened. She looked at Nathaniel, expecting him to bristle with offense. But instead she saw something unexpected flicker in his eyes, pain. For once, the CEO didn't look indignant. He looked human. Maybe he's right, Nathaniel admitted, his voice rough, surprising both Emily and Frank. Everything I touch, I break. My company, my father, my family. His gaze dropped, the words heavier than any confession she'd ever heard. But his eyes lifted to Emily, piercing, vulnerable. She doesn't let go. Not of her son, not of a stranger freezing in the snow. That's not weakness. That's something I've never known how to hold. Silence fell. The storm roared outside. Walter murmured in his sleep, and Emily felt the room tilt around her. Nathaniel's words struck deeper than she wanted to admit. Carving that wall she had built to keep men like him out. Frank shifted, the hard lines of his face softening. He sighed, brushing snow from his coat. I'll check back tomorrow, he muttered. But Emily, just be careful. His eyes lingered on her, protective, almost paternal. Before he turned and disappeared into the storm. The door shut, sealing the cold back outside. Emily leaned against it, her breath shaky. Nathaniel remained where he was, his chest rising and falling like he just fought a battle, without lifting a hand. For a long moment, neither spoke. The old duplex was quiet except for the heater's wheeze and Walter's uneven breaths. Then Emily lifted her eyes to Nathaniel, finding his gaze already on her. Heavy with something unspoken, gratitude, longing, fear. You didn't have to say that, she murmured. I did, he replied, his voice almost a whisper. Because it's true. Emily's heart thudded painfully. For the first time in years, she felt the storm inside her wasn't just her own, and in that fragile, terrifying silence, she realized she was standing on the edge of something that could either heal them all, or shatter her life completely. The storm broke with a violent gust near dawn, rattling the windows so fiercely that Emily woke with a start. The duplex was shrouded in blue-gray light, the kind of dim that came before sunrise, when the snow still owned the world. She sat up from the armchair where she had dozed off, her blanket slipping to the floor. Her first thought was Liam, safe in his bed down the hall. Her second was Walter. The sofa was empty. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs. She rose too quickly, nearly tripping over the blanket, her breath sharp in the icy air. Walter's blanket lay crumpled on the cushions, and the front door hung open an inch, the cold rushing in like an intruder. Walter, she whispered, then louder, Walter. Nathaniel appeared instantly from the kitchen, still dressed in yesterday's clothes, his eyes sharp with alarm. Where is he? Emily pointed to the door. He's gone. For one terrifying second, Nathaniel's face twisted with pure panic. Then he moved, his long strides carrying him out into the snow before Emily could stop him. She threw on her boots and coat, following, her breath tearing at her lungs. The storm had left the world buried. The snow reached nearly to her knees as she stumbled into the street. Nathaniel was ahead, scanning the white drifts, calling his father's name with a voice raw from sleeplessness and fear. Walter. The wind carried the sound away, but then a faint figure, a frail shadow staggering near the tree line at the edge of the road. Walter, barefoot again, his thin frame bent forward, his arms outstretched as if chasing something only he could see. Emily's breath caught. She and Nathaniel lunged through the snow together, their movements clumsy but desperate. Walter's voice carried back to them, broken but clear. She begged me. He begged me. Just a cake. White frosting. I said no. Nathaniel froze mid-stride. The words cracked through him like thunder. Emily grabbed his arm, pulling him forward. Not now, she urged. We can't lose him. They reached Walter just as his knees buckled. Emily caught his arm, Nathaniel catching his other. The three of them collapsing together in the snow. Walter's face lifted toward them, his eyes suddenly sharp, startling in their lucidity. It was in the truck, he whispered. It was me. I never told you. I was drinking. I thought one glass wouldn't matter. She wanted to take you to get cake. I should have driven, but I let her go, and she never came back. Nathaniel's face drained of color. He stared at his father, the confession slicing through years of silence, through decades of grief. You, his voice cracked. You never told me. Walter's tears froze on his cheeks, his body trembling violently in Emily's grip. I killed her, son. Not the snow, not the truck, me. The world seemed to stop. Emily held Walter tighter, but her eyes locked on Nathaniel. She had expected anger, a storm of rage, but what she saw was worse. Nathaniel's face broke. His chest heaved, a sound ripped from him that was neither word nor cry, but something caught between. He dropped to his knees in the snow, pulling his father against him, his hands shaking. All these years, he choked out. I blamed you. I blamed myself. And you. His voice faltered. You were drowning in it, too. Emily knelt beside them, her hands pressing to Walter's thin shoulders. her own heart hammering with the weight of the moment. The storm had passed, but the silence was heavier than any blizzard. For the first time, Walter looked at his son with clear eyes, not fogged by confusion or years of regret. "I'm sorry, Nathaniel." His lips quivered. "I should have said it then. I should have said it every day." The words hung in the freezing air, fragile, but real. Emily felt tears sting her own eyes. She had no history in this wound, no blood in the bond between father and son. Yet she felt the weight of it pressing down. This was not just a confession, it was a fracture being revealed. The kind of truth that could either heal or destroy. Walter's strength ebbed, his body sagging in their arms. Emily panicked, but Nathaniel pressed his ear to his father's chest, relief flickering when he heard the shallow, uneven breath. He lifted his head, his eyes wet, and met Emily's gaze. "He can't go back to that place," Emily said firmly, her voice shaking. "Not after this. He needs care, yes, but he needs you. And maybe he needs me, too." Nathaniel's chest rose and fell, his face torn open, stripped of every layer of power he had ever worn. For the first time in years, he looked not like a CEO, not like a man of wealth, but simply like a son broken, guilty, desperate to hold on to what little he had left. He tightened his arms around Walter, whispering, "We'll do it together, Dad. We'll do it together." Emily reached over, her hand brushing Nathaniel's, steady and sure. Their eyes met his, filled with loss, hers with quiet strength. In that fragile dawn, surrounded by snow and silence, they were bound together not by choice, but by the weight of a truth finally spoken. And in that truth, something else stirred, something terrifying, fragile and undeniable. Hope.